tonight, Gina will take us under the ice to share with us her groundbreaking Greenland adventures. At the end of her talk, she's kindly offered to answer our questions. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Gina Moseley.
Hello, can you hear me? Well, thank you very much for inviting me here this evening, and thank you, Jo, for the absolutely wonderful and very kind introduction. As she mentions, I've come from Austria, but originally I'm from Staffordshire, actually, so I moved over there 7 years ago. And today I will talk about the Greenland Caves project, but I wanted to start off with really my journey that took me there and really where it all began. Okay. So actually, this is me finishing my A-levels in 2002, Great Worley High School, and this is my chemistry class, and I'm just about here if you can spot me. And at this point, I was heading off to university to study geography, which is really what I absolutely loved, being outdoors and rolling around in the mud and working out what was going on in the landscape. And at my time at university, there's always a point where you have to do an individual research project, and you know, take control of your own learning, essentially. And my tutor told me, do what you enjoy because it shows in the final product. And this is really one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given. And I thought, well, I quite like caving, and I'm sure I can make this into some sort of geography subject. And I really did enjoy caving. So this is me, actually, when I finished primary school. So this is year 6, and I'm just about going on my first caving trip, and I'm already super excited about it. And then after that, during high school years, I would save up my pocket money, I would go on paper rounds, and I would save up so that I could pay to go caving in the summer as much as possible. So I just loved being underground. And then whilst I was at university, I developed this project that kind of basically was a good excuse to go caving, and I was looking at the drip waters in caves and understanding the microclimate within the caves. And this led me to understand that actually you can do cave science, and it exposed me to this whole field of research that you can do. And so from there, I went on from Birmingham to Bristol to do a PhD and to further my interest in caving. And I really got into sport caving. So this is me in my super happy place. This is in Somerset, and this is what I love doing. But besides studying caves and doing sport caving and going abroad on expeditions, I was in the University Caving Club. And I met this lovely guy called Charlie Self. He had been in the caving club before me. And you can't see it very well here, but he's cutting his birthday cake with an axe. So this is the sort of things that we would do socially in the caving club. And Charlie one day told me that for many years he'd been trying to organise an expedition to actually the very north of Greenland, where there's the most northerly cave in the world, which is still unexplored as it turns out. But in that process, let me just start this, it might be a bit slow. He told me about some caves in Northeast Greenland. Is it going? Slowly. And these caves had been discovered in 1960 by the US Geological Survey and the US Army. And the reason they were up there, it was the Cold War, and they were looking for places where they could ditch an aircraft in an emergency in the Arctic. So they were doing a lot of work in these ice-free areas. And a few of the guys in the US Geological Survey had discovered these caves, and this was published in 1960 in a caving magazine, basically. It's a very grainy black and white photo. You can just about make out 2 holes here. This is a cave feature, if you like, with a man stood in it, and also a bigger cave. And so just the presence of caves was quite interesting, but they weren't very long. They were only maybe 100 meters long at most, which from an exploration perspective is not all that exciting. So otherwise I would normally go to Borneo and be underground for several days, many, many kilometers underground. So these aren't extensive caves, but just the fact there are caves there was exciting. Now in this particular paper, there was a passage that said, the fill is capped by a flowstone deposit 4 inches thick, formed of coarsely crystalline calcite. On top of this are stubs of stalagmites about 1 inch in diameter and 1/2 to 1 inch high. Now this, from my scientific perspective, was really very interesting, and particularly the bit about flowstone and stalagmites. And so this is a very bit of short science, and then I'll go back to the adventure. And so my work involves now working with stalagmites. And so in a cave we have stalactites, which have a C, they come from the ceiling. A stalagmite, which grows up from the ground, it has a G for ground, so that's a great way of remembering which one's which. And these stalagmites form from water, and this water has travelled from the oceans through the atmosphere, through soil above a cave. It ends up in the cave and it deposits calcite, and with it, it brings a chemical signature of the ocean, the atmosphere and the soil above the cave at the time that it forms. So I can look at how the temperature's changed, if it was hotter, colder, wetter, drier. I know if there was a soil above the cave, if there were trees, if there were grass, if there were bushes, and all this we can find out from looking at the chemical signature. And this is an example of a stalagmite that's been taken. This one's actually from Austria, and it's been cut in half and slabbed, and there you can see how the light shines through. And then here is this track down the middle is where we've done some chemical analyses and actually measured 10 samples per millimetre, so we can really work with very small samples. And now stalagmites were said to be present in these caves in Greenland, but also flowstone. And flowstone is essentially the same thing, but rather than forming from drips of water, it forms from very thin sheets of flowing water, but it's still formed layer by layer, and we can still analyse the chemistry. And now this was interesting because today this part of Northeast Greenland is completely dry and the ground is frozen. So today it's not possible to form stalagmites or flowstone because there's no water, and if there was, it can't get through. And so by having the presence of flowstone there, we knew that this part of Greenland must have been warmer and wetter in the past. So it's from a climate that was warmer and wetter. And so I thought I'd like to put an expedition together to go to these caves, which no one else was interested in, and to construct a record of climate from these caves. And this would be the first time that such an approach had even been applied in Greenland, or even the whole Arctic, actually, so no one's done this before. I and my team expected it to be older than the current limit of the Greenland Ice Cores, so I'm sure many of you have heard of these deep cores that have been drilled from the middle of the Greenland ice sheet. And they go back about 128,000 years altogether. But the problem with an ice sheet is it tends to melt in a warmer climate, of course, so you can't go very far back in climate, and you can't go very far back in time, and you can't get much information about how Greenland responds in a warm climate because there's no ice sheet there. But with these stalagmites and flowstones, we expected to cover a warmer and wetter climate, like I say. And this is important because this could be used as an analogue for how this part of Greenland may respond in the future. So that's the basis for why we do it. And then just to add a little bit more rationale and motivation for why this is important, this is a graph or a map, let's say, looking down on the North Pole. We've got Greenland here, North America's over here, here's the UK, so we're really looking down. And this shows how the average annual surface temperature has changed for this part of the world over the last 50 years. And so we can see that Northeast Greenland is really highly sensitive, and in the future it will just get worse and worse. But we have very little information from geological records or ice cores and things that really give us some hardcore facts about what will happen to this part of the world. Okay, so I decided to put an expedition together. So I've been thinking about this for maybe 10 years, actually, by the time I actually sent the first email. So I heard about the caves when I was in the caving club at university and thought I need a bit more experience and time. And then finally in 2013, I sent the first email to find out how expensive it would be. I had no idea about how you arrange an expedition to Northeast Greenland. And I was given a huge, crazy sum, which was completely impossible. And then finally, I got in touch with this guy, Clive Johnson. He's won the Polar Medal for services to the Arctic and Antarctica, and he happens to be the brother of a friend of mine, which was a nice coincidence. And he came up with a let's say, budget-friendly plan that would allow us to do enough research. And his plan was to, have we got the thing? We would fly to Greenland, up to Centrum So. We would land a plane on the edge of this lake. We would inflate a boat, cross the lake in a boat, and then walk for 3 days to get to the caves. So this was our expedition plan, and it meant that we could just about achieve it. So I put a team together, including Robbie Schoen, who is a photographer and has taken most of the pictures that you'll see. Mark Wright, who's a cave explorer. Chris Blakely, he works for Petzl, which is a climbing products manufacturer and also a cave explorer. And I invited my boss, Professor Spertel, along, who was my scientific assistant, if you like. We could talk things through in the field. And despite it being a cheaper way, because there was no helicopters, we still had to raise the money. So we crowdfunded the expedition. There was actually 59 different sponsors in the end. And we got a lot of media support, which was great. And we spent a year training for the expedition because we were going to be carrying heavy bags for those 3 days. So I luckily live on a mountain, which is very convenient. So spent a lot of time hiking up in the winter and then the spring and also the summer. And we got to the point in the summer where we were carrying bags of bottles of water up and pouring them out when we got to the top. It was so hot. And expeditions require a lot of thinking and a lot of talking, and we all lived far apart, so there were a lot of Skype meetings with everyone about what food to take, what clothes, this, that and the other. And this is basically Robbie and my equipment just before we leave, so it's kind of cool and funky now to make one of these expedition equipment pictures. And then finally, in July 2015, we all set off. We met in Reykjavik, flew to Akureyri, and then on to Constable Point. It was amazing, really, crossing the Greenland Sea, which I also did this year, but in a 50-foot yacht. But this time we flew. Past all these amazing pack ice features, which this year we had to be very careful not to get stuck in with our boat. And so I just hang on some of these pictures. We've got the Greenland ice cap in the distance. And we finally landed at Constable Point, which is a very small air base in Greenland, on the east coast of Greenland. And then from there we went on to Mestersvig, which is a Danish military base. And normally civilians aren't allowed in there, but this is a route into the Northeast Greenland National Park, which we were entering for our research. And again, this journey we went over all these fantastic Jurassic age rocks. And then finally we landed at Mestersvig, which is known as the Arctic Riviera. And this is a Musk Ox, which they use as their emblem, if you like. And Mestersvig is a small military base. Like I say, there's only 5 people based there all year round. And so when we arrived, we basically doubled the population of this military base in a moment. And we spent a few days there sorting through equipment. Our logistics organiser, Clive, has a base there. So we spent a lot of time in there looking through his gear, sorting out the boats and the fuel, and we spent a lot of time discussing how much fuel we actually need. The boats hadn't been used for a few years, so we had to inflate them and leave them for a couple of days just to check that they didn't go down. And then I've just added a few small clips in here just to break up listening to me.
That works.
Yeah, so a small generator. Went through all our rations. So we had huge ration boxes that Clive had prepared. We've got freeze-dried food in there, very lightweight biscuits, tinned cheese, if you can believe such a thing exists. It's awful, but you know, it's fine when you're on expedition. And Clive, our polar logistics expert, said you really couldn't have picked a more remote spot if you really tried. And that really brought it home to us, I think, how far we were going away from everyone else. You can see it's quite cold as well. It's very, yeah, we're in the cloud a lot of the time there. But finally that cleared, and with it, with the cloud gone and the wind gone, the mosquitoes came out, and all these little black dots are mosquitoes, and they really are nasty in Greenland. Spent a lot of time sorting through the cook box. So Clive had been great, but he's not normally used to working with teams that are travelling all the time. Most teams have a base camp that they work from and always come back to, so they can take lots of gear with them. But we basically went through this and threw most of the things out because we thought we're not carrying tea towels with us. We don't need those in Northeast Greenland. And then because we were crossing the lake as well, and this was the first time we'd really seen all the equipment we'd be taking with us, we were having practice packs with the boat, and we were deciding, do we take 2 boats with us? Do we take one boat and more fuel and do shuttle runs backwards and forwards, but still we need 2 engines because what if one breaks and all this sort of stuff. So again, lots and lots of discussing because we really didn't know what we were going to ultimately. And then finally it was time to pack up all the equipment, the Zodiacs, after we'd finally decided what we were doing. And to get it all back in the Twin Otter. There was a lot of gear to take. And of course, room for a bit of fun on the way. And we were staying in the army barracks, so of course we cleaned them afterwards like as if we were in the military as well. And we spent some time in the mess with the soldiers, talking them through what we were doing, and they were really excited. They were saying, oh, in the winter we could go up there with the sledges and the dogs, and we could go and look for caves for you as well. So I think in future we might actually manage to get some Danish military support as well if we really needed it. And then after a few days, like I say, we loaded up the Twin Otter. And this is what it looks like inside, a bit dark again, but basically we've got the pilots at the front, we're all sat at the very back of the plane, and all the gear is in the middle, with all the heavy items underneath the wings and over the wheels. And then there was a breaker at the front in case a plane has to stop very suddenly, then all the gear would shift forward. It wouldn't crush us, and hopefully there was enough space that it also didn't crush the pilots as well. So we set off, and this is the noise of a Twin Otter. We had that for 5 hours. Yeah, so having gone from Constable Point to Mestersvig, we flew initially to Danmarkshavn, where we needed to stop and refuel. And this is the guy in charge of Danmarkshavn. He came out in full anti-mosquito gear. He just didn't like being outside because of all the biting and stuff. And they said they'd had a polar bear that had been visiting them quite often because they'd got some ducks or geese or something nearby that was coming to steal the eggs from them. So they'd had a regular visitor in the past weeks. And then from there, we flew up to Centrum So, up to the lake. And then this is just a clip of us taking off from Danmarkshavn and the route. So bumpy landing. But it was great. We crossed the ice sheet. That slowly disappeared and was replaced with, there's the ice sheet in the background, but slowly we lost it. And we were over these beautiful milky blue rivers. And this is the strip that we landed on. So this is the lake that we would later cross. And the airstrip is basically down here on this spit of land. And this is it from the other side. And we spent a few days here at the end. And here you can see how the runway is marked out with these orange markers. But even whilst I was stood there, there were huge chunks of this land just falling off into the lake and into the river. So I don't know how long it will last, actually. But it was definitely not very stable. And at this point, there's a twin otter. It's leaving us. And so we're 5 people at far northeast of Greenland with no one around for many, many, many hours. And at this point, we felt really very remote. And what I will say is we took a drone with us, because, you know, everyone does these days. And it took off here. There's nothing around for miles. And the only thing it does is go straight into this flagpole. It's the first thing it does and crashes. Totally destroyed, can't be used. So that was great. Here is an old hut that the US Army had left behind, and there was actually a huge water pump behind there as well. So this is from the 1960s. Also, unfortunately, just at the end of the runway was this very poor site. So in the back we've got the American hut. All these fuel drums which have been left behind, and a dead polar bear was there, which was very hard to see. And of course we're in Greenland, so we're aware that we may come across polar bears, but everyone had said to us, oh, where you're all going, there's no polar bears there. And I think seeing this brought it home that actually, you know, polar bears do get around quite a bit. But there was some other nice furry things around. We had this little Arctic stoat which kept following us around. He was quite curious, and there was a lot of birds and things. But still, we did realise we are quite remote and we can't really take chances. So when you're in Greenland, you do have to have a rifle with you just in case. And we had all been sent on a polar bear defence course, let's say, where we it was basically learning how to use a rifle and in what instances we may be allowed to shoot one. So luckily we didn't have to, and I've never actually seen a polar bear other than that one, so it's not been an issue. So we landed on this bit of land here, and the plan, as I say, was to cross this lake and make base camp in this bay. So we inflated the boat, we got it loaded up, we pushed off, and if I flick back to this picture, you will see that there's a lot of sandbanks here. But when we were there, this was all, the water level was much higher, and we didn't see these sandbanks, and we didn't know they were there. So we pushed off from here and grounded. And so we took our boots off, rolled up our trousers, jumped in the water, tried to pull it off, and it's very cold, that water. Trying to find a route round, and for maybe half an hour we were just trying to get out into the lake, and we just kept grounding because we didn't know where the sandbanks were. Finally, Mark went for a walk, and he must have walked half a kilometre, and he literally could walk on water. That is how it looked to us. And he never found a deeper part of water, even though the lake is 70 metres deep, and we just could not get out there. So the only thing to do was to take as much weight out the boat, so then we had to transport it all the way back to shore. And we dragged the boat around this bit of land and onto the other side here, so we could get into deeper water. And this, like I say, this is very, very cold. A little bit grim. And so we were delayed. The intention had been to get across the lake that day and set up camp, but this delayed us quite a bit, so we stayed inside the US Army hut that day. And the expedition had been planned so that we had spare days, we had days to lose, if you like, or flexible days. So we weren't in a major time crunch. We took the opportunity to take some weather measurements, which is something we try to do quite regularly. We played around with the bare fence, so this is, can we see it here? There's an orange line going across here. It's basically a tripwire that people use in the Arctic. They put it around their camps as an alarm for bears. Grr, I'm a big hungry polar bear. The idea is that goes off, the noise should scare away the polar bear, hopefully, and you're alerted. We did have a bit more shooting practice. We found a really old Coke can at 80 degrees north in Northeast Greenland. That was a very awful thing to find, actually. So we had a little bit of practice just in case. And then the next day we set off. We managed to get into deeper water and managed to finally get across the lake.
This is the square bay as well, Gina.
And thankfully the bay that we'd identified as a good place for base camp turned out to be fine. We could get the boat in and out of there really easily. So yeah, this is where we set up base camp. And Chris, Robbie and I set up base camp whilst Christoph, Robbie and I set up base camp while Chris and Mark went backwards and forwards in the end doing some shuttle runs. And it was a perfect place for base camp. It was really nice on the edge of the lake. And we set it up. This is our cook tent and food tent. And the sleeping tents are further away. The idea being that the cook tent is downwind, so if anything's a bit curious, it should go there first, make a load of noise before it gets to the people in the tent. That's how to set up camp in the Arctic. Is this a video? No. Go back. And then from this point, we've got 3 days of hiking to get to the caves, and so we still had to strip the gear down again into what we could feasibly carry with us. We went through all the food and really took just what we needed, plus a bit of extra. And we managed to fix the drone. But actually, in the end, we were already carrying 26 kilogram bags, and taking a drone with us as well was just a bit too much, so that ended up being left behind at base camp. And then finally, the weather came good on the day we set off on our hike. We used the drone a little bit. You can see it here. And it was really warm. It was 16 to 18 degrees, can you believe it, in Northeast Greenland in early August. And off we went, up and over this ridge. And so we walked together from the base camp up to a kit dump. That was about 11 kilometres. Went past these fantastic scree slopes. We're just a few small people down here. Really stunning. Bags are heavy and it's hot. We needed quite a lot of breaks. Saw some fantastic wildlife, including Arctic terns. There were bees. There were Arctic fox. Really incredible. The meadows are amazing in this part of Northeast Greenland, really beautiful flowers. And then at one point we could hear what was an engine coming towards us, which we never expected. And then this Hercules flew past us, and we never really knew why they were there, though we were told afterwards that, you know, some strange activity had been reported in Northeast Greenland, and they were just coming to check out and see what it was. I don't know if that's true or not, but they certainly came very close to us and carried on. We got all the permits, they knew where we were, but it was, yeah, interesting to see this fly past. And the water quality in Northeast Greenland is nothing to worry about. We really didn't need to use any tablets or anything for purification. It was really good to drink, no problems there. And we did come across a few of these guys. These are Musk Ox, and they're not all that dangerous, so they are very large, and they like to be on higher ground. So if they see you, they can run very fast uphill. We were not bothered by them too much, but again, it's something we had to be careful of because they can charge camps and things. And then finally, we made our way to the kit dump, which was near this big conglomerate rock. We had a bit of a play climbing on it, left our kit, and then we separated at this point. So Christoph, Robbie and myself carried on to make an advance camp. Mark and Chris went back to base camp to pick up some more gear. And at this point, the landscape really changed. We got these beautiful kind of cotton flowers. We're on the permafrost, so this is an indication of a permafrost soil, and it's really spongy. It's really nice to walk on. It's like a football pitch. And then finally, after 12 hours of walking, we made camp down here next to this river. And the main reason we stopped actually was because of this river. We didn't want to tackle a river crossing unnecessarily, and it was 10 o'clock at night anyway. So it seemed like a good time to stop. Next day, we met back up at the kit dump, split the gear again, and advanced all together to the river camp. Here we are. And here's an old Musk Ox skeleton that we found along the way that's been bleached in the sun. And this is a view of advanced camp, really. This is the midnight sun. So, of course, we're there in July, August, and the sun doesn't go down. So this is midnight in Greenland, which is a really fantastic experience, actually. It does get cold at this point, but the sun never really goes beyond the horizon. And because we'd had such nice weather, there was no wind, we'd had a lot of mosquitoes. And so after 2 days of hiking, this is my arm. I was wearing long sleeve shirts and I was wearing 100% DEET, and it was pretty awful. This is the vents in my trousers. So they were open, so they got in there quite well. We counted 223 bites on my left arm, and then we stopped counting. So it wasn't that bad, actually. It looks worse than it was. It just felt like a sunburn, and I was really insistent not to start scratching them because I thought that would be the worst thing ever. But yeah, it was kind of, unpleasant. And also, I should say, Greenland mosquitoes seem to fly slower than other mosquitoes I've come across. So you get in the tent at night and there's 5 or 6 mosquitoes in there. You can just pluck them out the air and they kind of fly very slow. So I don't know what evolutionary trait that has to do with, but they were quite different. And then we just had one more day left of hiking to get to the caves. And we had been basing everything on this only map that existed from 1960, actually. No, 1983. So Americans were there in 1960, and then there was a French expedition in 1983. And they produced this map, which was okay, but not ideal. And I kind of laid it over Google Earth and thought, oh yeah, well this is this valley, and this seems to fit here. And so the caves are here. Great. Off we go. So we had a much shorter walk on this day. We had the river crossing to tackle, and because we were doing it in the morning, it was easier to cross. Later at night, there was quite a lot more water in there. And then we had this hike down this huge, beautiful valley. It's called Grottedalen, after the caves. And these scales are just immense. You don't really get a sense unless you're there walking along it. Big rivers. We're getting tired by now as well, of course. Again, lovely permafrost. And we get to the valley. After all this effort, I'm fine, there are no caves. Great. I'm a really good geographer, really good. So yeah, there's no caves. We have a good look around, definitely no caves. But on the walk up there, we'd gone past this side valley and we had noticed caves. And at the time we thought, oh, well, we'll look at those on the way back, but we'll get to where we're intending to go to. And we'd even stopped and had a discussion about them.
So this black thing is our cliff.
Yeah, so this is the valley.
Yeah.
Okay, so they were talking about the caves and the cliff and where we are and things. So we decide, okay, well, we'll go back and we'll look at the caves that we have spotted. So we backtrack, get there. At this point, we've all walked a fair bit, let's say, carrying these 26 kilogram bags. And we get there and we find they're exactly the caves that we've been looking for all along. And actually, we just walked straight past them. But because we looked at them from a different angle, we hadn't really recognised them as what we were looking for. And so it was nice to find them in the end, but we could have done without the extra 12 kilometres of walking that we did. And we were very lucky, we didn't really have many first aid injuries. Mark's foot was hurting a bit by this point, but mostly because he hadn't broken in his boots beforehand, and he actually only told us it was hurting when we got to the cave, so we did a bit of, made some arrangements to ease the pressure. And so this is the wall with the caves in. Here you can see the caves from the 1960 article, which were very clear. This is actually a U-shaped cave. It's the same cave. It's got 2 entrances. And then there's also a west wall to this. So this particular cave here, which is the one with the flowstone in that we were aiming for, is this one. We could have a quick look at the ice cave in the corner as well.
Sure. Which one is that?
It's in this corner here. No, you see the half one there?
Yeah.
Down to the bottom right, there's another shelter, but with quite a lot of ice in it, and like a chimney at the back with ice coming down.
Good.
So.
But this half thing is not interesting.
No, I don't think so. I didn't pop up there, but it's more interesting around the corner to the right. So, and also, so we were just looking for caves. We found quite a few, some small shelters, some had got ice in them, which we collected. And this gives us an idea of the modern chemical signature that you can find in the water and the ice that's in Greenland, so that's a good baseline for us. And then we hiked up the east wall, up these steep scree slopes, looking for caves. So there were 12 caves reported in the original 1960 article. And we managed to find this small little tube, which looks quite insignificant, but it was a huge step for us because in there we already managed to find our very first piece of calcite. So bearing in mind the whole expedition is based on there being one flowstone deposit in one cave. That's a lot really to base a huge project on. So we were really pleased to already start to find signs that there was more calcite in the area than expected. This is a U-shaped cave looking out across the big valley. And inside, this was the only cave where we really got out of daylight. Some really nice shaped passages, a lot of ice around the walls. We took some sediment from there for pollen analysis to understand what's in the sediments today. And here you can see in this particular cave you've got a very dark limestone on top and then a lighter limestone underneath. And this is basically the contact where the cave has originally formed in between these two blocks of limestone. And we found a few more smaller holes. This one was a great one. It had this huge flowstone deposit in it. And here you can see the flowstone, the different sheets of calcite. But these circles are stalactites that have broken off the roof, fallen on the floor, and then the flowstone has formed on top and they've become trapped inside. So this was really exciting to find for us. It was our first opportunity to really get a really good calcite sample. And so at the end of day 1 of looking in the caves, we'd already got 3 calcite samples, which for me, I was so excited at this point because, like I say, I'd invested a huge amount of effort into finding just 1 piece of calcite. The next day we split up. Mark, Chris and Robbie stayed on the east wall. Chris was really desperate to find the most to get the record for having the most northerly explored cave on the planet, let's phrase it that way. And Christoph and I went out to check the west wall. And so Mark and Chris and Robbie had a few interesting climbs to negotiate across these scree slopes. And in this picture, Mark is aiming for, one of these caves up here or even up here. And even though we know there is another cave further north, this cave is actually the most northerly explored cave on the planet at the moment, because the one further north has not yet been explored. And this was a record that Mark wanted to get personally for himself, to be the first person in the most northerly explored cave on the planet. And we asked him what he would call it, and he said it's my cave. So this is what it's now called, my cave. Quite exciting anyway. This one required a bit more climbing, a bit more expertise than what I would have necessarily. And inside there they found a cairn. We still don't know who built this, whether it was the Americans who were in there in 1960, or maybe some Inuits, I don't know. But someone else has been in this cave before us. And again, they found these beautiful ice features on the wall, and this is kind of like the inside of your freezer at home. This is hoarfrost, just from moisture in the air, and it freezes on the walls. And of course, any caves we discover, we should also survey and map.
Where that sample we're taking is 3.8 wide. About that wide, it's about that tall.
Sort of 4 or 5 metres deep. And they're all one wall on the back, at the end of the cave, is just layers.
So they'd also found a lot of calcite, but they didn't want to sample it, so they reported their findings to me. And on day 3, we decided to try and access these higher level caves. So the Americans and the French had been in the U-shaped cave here, but as far as we knew, no one had been up here. And the leader of the French expedition had suggested we get on top and abseil down into these. But my boss is very good on scree slopes, so he decided, no, we will just walk straight up this scree slope, which is what we did. And actually it was fine. It was a bit loose, let's say. For me, a bit scary, but everyone else was happy on there. And at the top we found, this is a flowstone that is so old there's no cave left around it anymore, but the flowstone feature is still there. And then so we've come up this scree slope, and then we had to make our way across here. Of course it's above this big drop, so we needed to be careful, so we put some hand lines in just to make it a bit safer. And finally got out onto this ledge where we could easily get round to the caves. And then can anyone spot our tents on that picture? So we're looking down on our camp. Can you see them? It's like a Where's Wally? Here we go. Here they are, our 3 little tents down at camp. So we're over here. I can't see from here. Yeah, they are in here. There. And let me see if I can, like in there, in this. And we managed to get into these caves which had not been found before, or not been explored before. And I was really excited to find this, so geologists get excited about the strangest things. And this is a really thick piece of flowstone. That's a very long climate record in there. And of course, we were doing this all on a budget. There was no helicopter support, so actually I can't sample this. That's a very heavy thing to work with. So for now, I just took lots of small pilot samples to work with and see if realistically getting a climate record from this area is going to be possible. But inside this cave, we had beautiful hoarfrost again, all over the ceiling. It was very cold in here. Some fantastic crystals. At the back it was really chilly. -6 degrees it was in there. And while we're taking, cave photography takes quite a long time because you have to get all the lights set up and everything. So that was a little bit challenging